continuing with classical conditioning. First, I want to acknowledge that I dropped my microphone and it's not working. I have ordered another one, but until that comes in, you're going to have to turn up your volume a little bit more than usual. I apologize for that. So continuing with classical conditioning, we did the basics. We got some basic terminology down, more stuff to know about classical conditioning. All right, so first of all, a term, I might have thrown this term out in a previous video without really explaining it, just defining it. Acquisition. Acquisition, or the acquisition phase, is when you are acquiring your conditioned response. That is when you are pairing the neutral stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus. That is where you are developing your conditioned response. So that's your acquisition phase. That's where you're building up, like with the dogs, when they kept presenting food with bell, food with bell, food with bell. That's the acquisition phase. With little Albert, when they were presenting rat with loud noise, white rat, loud noise, white rat, loud noise, over and over again, that is all part of the acquisition phase. The goal of the acquisition phase is to develop, for that individual to develop that conditioned response. So salivating to the sound of a bell, or the infant little Albert crying at the sound of the loud noise. Those would be the conditioned responses that were acquired during the acquisition phase. So you've acquired a conditioned response. Is it permanent? Does it last forever? No, of course not. It can disappear, it can die off or go extinct, and we have this term extinction. Extinction is when a conditioned response fades, it dies off, it goes away, and typically this happens when you are no longer pairing it with that unconditioned stimulus. The learned response can go away, it can fade away. This might happen where, if you are going to school where there is a bell, and you're conditioned to know, hey, bell means lunch, and you're like, okay, bell, lunch, all right. And then, let's say they change the schedule, but the bell system is still working, and they say, okay, folks, the bells are still gonna go off at this time, but we're not actually gonna have lunch at that time, all right? So, are you still gonna get up and be like, lunch? Now, you might have some times where you still get up and do lunch and say, oh, it's lunch. We'll label that in a bit. But when you don't do it anymore, because those things are no longer being paired anymore, you're like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah. And then you have extinction of that response when they're not being paired anymore. And so, you no longer associate those two, you can get extinction. And then also just kind of, sometimes you can just get fade with just kind of getting used to things, all right? Now, what if that bell goes off and you have already been told, hey, that the bell no longer means lunch, we just have bells going off, we haven't reset the system. You've been told that there's no lunch involved, but that bell rings and your previous conditioning still kicks in and you're like, oh, lunch, oh, that's right, it's not lunch, oh, dang. All right, if that happens, we can label that spontaneous recovery. Spontaneous recovery is when a previously conditioned response returns, it comes back. And this can happen. So sometimes you might have a silly moment like that where you're like, I knew it wasn't time for lunch, but I still did it. Maybe you switch phones, all right? And so the ringtone that you associate with one phone is different, than the ringtone that you use. Or maybe you're like me, I never do anything. I just use whatever ringtone is already programmed into the phone. But let's say you switch phones and you hear somebody else's phone going off. You're like, it's my phone. Oh wait, no, actually that's not. Why are you acting like that's your phone? Well, that's a spontaneous recovery of a previous conditioning that you had with your old phone. So spontaneous recovery is when old conditioned behavior returns. It comes back. All right, so any of these things can happen, and any of these things have to be kept in mind if you were trying to change behavior with conditioning. Like if someone is using behavior modification or applied behavior analysis to try to change someone's behavior, somebody working in clinical or perhaps an applied psychology area, if they are trying to apply these principles to change, hopefully improving behavior, they have to keep in mind that we might see some extinction, some spontaneous recovery. This is why when I worked at a hospital where behavior modification was used on some units, on one unit in particular, the neurobehavioral unit, and when we'd send folks home, we'd send clients home, and we often would tell whoever they're living with, their guardians, their caregivers, we'd say, okay, this is the program we've been doing in the hospital. This is the conditioning that they've been exposed to in the hospital. Try to maintain that at home. Try to continue that at home. Why? Well, we didn't want extinction to happen. We wanted them to maintain those responses that they had learned. And then we also warned them that once you start seeing change in behavior, you can get spontaneous recovery and see something, show up again. All right, so that's some terminology to know. I'm going to tell you some more additional information about classical conditioning in the next video.